What is an executive order and how or does it affect you at all? Let's jump in. Hey everyone, it's Jason Ian with Americans in Action, americansinaction.info, and our sister website, spiritawarenessfoundation.com. So we've heard a lot over the years of executive orders signed by President Trump, executive orders overridden by Joe Biden, executive order, executive order, executive order. So what exactly is an executive order, and does it really have any effect on you directly, or is it just assumed and presumed that it actually has some sort of authority over you, the living, breathing man, woman, American? By the way, as always, this is just for your education and entertainment purposes only. You must do your own due diligence as you are the creator of your own reality. So before we even get into it, you have to remember everything has to do with the language. Therefore, it is essential that we define all of our terms when having any type of conversation, let alone conversations that are directly involved with the Babylonian commerce empire, kingdom of heaven, common law, and so on. So let's start with a basic definition of an executive order from the American Bar Association. That's a club for all the attorneys. And if any group is going to define executive orders, the American Bar Association is going to be on point with how they interpret executive orders. So what do they say? An executive order is a signed, written, and published directive from the President of the United States that manages operations of the federal government. What that means is it's basically a managerial position giving directives to his office. Now, this same website expounds upon the definition of executive orders by telling you what it is not. An executive order is not legislation. They require no approval from Congress, and Congress cannot simply overturn them. So starting right there, we see that an executive order is simply a directive by the president to give orders to his cabinet in the executive branch, and it really has nothing to do with Congress, and it's not legislation. Well, let's legislation. Let's look that up. Well, here's a very in-depth definition of the word legislation. It refers to the preparation and enactment of laws by a legislative body. We have three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And the legislation branch is the body of which the lawmaking process happens. The legislative process includes evaluating, amending, and voting on proposed laws, and is concerned with the words used in the bill, again it's the language, to communicate the values, judgments, and purposes of the proposal. An idea becomes an item of legislation, business, that's corporation talk, financial talk, when it is written as a bill, which is also financial talk. A bill is draft or tentative version of what might become part of the written law. In other words, it's not necessarily a law. It has to go through this legislation process. Once the bill gets passed through the legislation process, it is then called an act or a statute. Now, we're going to go places here, so stick with me. Legislation is the process or result of enrolling, enacting, or promulgating laws by a legislature, parliament, well, that's in Europe, or analogous to a governing body, which is here in the States. Again, it's all about the process of making law. Finally, point blank, legislation, definition number one, the act or process of legislating, lawmaking, a proposed or enacted law or group of laws, the act of legislating, preparation, and enactment of laws. The laws are enacted through legislation. Now, here in this country, attorneys are supposed to stand behind the law. And what again do the attorneys say that executive orders are? Here it is again from the American Bar Association. Executive orders are not legislation, meaning they are not law. Now let's just take a quick dive on how legislation process is made based upon the Constitution for the United States of America. In Article 1, Section 1 of the United States Constitution, all legislation powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All laws prior to them becoming enacted and put into existence must go through legislations, and laws begin with an idea, and then they are going through the process of where it's looked at by the Senate, and then it goes to the House, and they all vote back and forth. They send it upstairs to the president, and then the president can either veto it or sign it into law. And the answering enforcement of all laws are what? We the people. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, meaning rights that cannot be taken away from us, that among these are our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the what? The consent of the governed. These are our founding documents. This one specifically, the Declaration of Independence, United States of America, 1776, where it specifically and explicitly says that it is we the people that are in charge of the House, the Senate, which is the Congress, who therefore has to give stuff to the president, and then the president goes back to Congress, who therefore answers to us. The Ninth Amendment, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. What that means is even if the certain rights are not enumerated, they are implied and still protected by the Constitution. So any law that is repugnant to the Constitution, in other words, violates our unalienable rights to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, amongst others, is null and void. Supreme Court case of the United States of America, Marbury versus Madison, specifically in 1801, emphasizes this reality that the power of the law, it resides in the people, and it clearly states that any law repugnant to the Constitution is void. So now we ask ourselves, do we live in a republic or do we live in a monarchy? Do we live in a republic or do we live in a monarchy? A monarchy is that of a king or a queen who dictates and creates laws, and all the people are subject to said laws. Or do we live in a republic where it's we the people that are in charge, and the governing officials must answer to us? Well, that is what our founding documents are. But Jay, what about this definition? A legal definition of an executive order is defined as a declaration by the president or a governor which has the force of law, usually based on existing statutory powers. That language is very specific. It's using force. Force is not consent. Statutory powers is that which is implied to have gone through legislation, but as Marbury versus Madison says, any law repugnant to the Constitution is null and void. You must realize that all laws that are enforced are by your consent. Everything in the Babylonian Empire, let alone the universe, is by your voluntary consent. Even if you believe in extraterrestrials, they cannot control you unless you consent to them. And remember, coercion is not consent. So do executive orders have the force of law? Not based upon our constitutional documents, and not if it violates your unalienable rights that were granted to you by your Creator, and unless you consent to them. You must know your innate power. Much love.